getting worse. Extreme hot weather, longer heat waves, more drought, particularly in the Midwest. The potential for double the devastation from massive wildfires. In other words, exactly what we saw in California. Rising sea levels, rising to the point that will eventually result in mass migrations from coastal cities. So what is Trump doing with the report that his own administration released? Nothing. So far, the White House has dismissed the findings as largely based on the most extreme scenario. And here is how the president's own party is reacting to it over the weekend on the Sunday shows.
All the proposals I've seen so far that would address any of these issues would devastate the U.S. economy and have little or no benefit.
Any time that we are putting regulation out, we need to always consider the impact to American industry and jobs.
Well, let's take what the assessment said, and it contradicts much of what you just heard from Senators Lee and Senator Ernst. It predicts inaction would be even more expensive, as much as 10% knocked off the size of the American economy. Crop failures in the Midwest disrupted American exports and supply chains. Joining me, Axios energy and climate change reporter Amy Harder and the director of Penn State's Earth Science Center, Michael Mann. He's also the author of The Madhouse Effect, How Climate Change Denial is Threatening Our Planet, Destroying Our Politics, and Driving Us Crazy. Michael, you know, you've been on a lot in the past week with me, and I appreciate it. It's probably more than I expected to have climate change on my shows. I'm happy about that. This climate change report that came out on Friday, it goes into a lot of detail. It's over 1,000 pages long. Some of the big takeaways were broken down by The Atlantic and New York Times and The Washington Post. One of them, that the Earth is getting hotter, despite the freak snowstorms you see and the colder temperatures you might feel on Thanksgiving Day. By and large, the Earth is getting warmer. Also, that fires in the West will get worse and worse. People are going to need to leave the coast, and then it's going to cost us untold amounts of money in damages. I mean, look at what the wildfires around Los Angeles cost from 1990 to 2000. $3.1 billion in damages alone. And that doesn't even go into the flooding and the other stuff that will be expensive once climate change, or once we get farther down the line. So, Michael, can you just give us an idea of a better assessment of the climate change report from a scientific perspective?
Sure. As usual, from the Trump administration, we're hearing claims that are the opposite of what is the reality. They're claiming that it will be too costly to act on climate change, when in fact it's too costly not to act. We're already seeing the damages that climate change is bringing. Moreover, the projections, the climate model projections, have actually been overly conservative. Historically, we have underestimated the rate of loss of ice from the ice sheets, underestimated sea level rise. The models have underestimated the impact of climate change on the sorts of unprecedented extreme weather events that we have seen play out in real time this summer and into this fall. So if anything, we have been too conservative in assessing the damages and risks associated with human-caused climate change. Just the opposite of what Trump and other contrarians are claiming now.
And Michael, also with the Earth warming and temperatures rising in the internal parts of the United States and in the internal parts of other countries away from the coast, it's going to cost time for actual outside labor. You won't be able to work outside for as many days of the year because it will literally be too hot to do so and too dangerous to do so. So crops will suffer, the labor force will suffer.
Yeah, that's right. In every sector of society, when it comes to agriculture, when it comes to tourism, when it comes to health and healthcare costs, and the risks to life and livelihood that climate change poses, we are seeing a tax on the economy now that is more than 1%. And if we don't do something about this problem, what this report lays bare is by the end of this century, we will see a tax 10% of our economy will be lost due to human-caused climate change and its impacts. So it's far too expensive not to act. Far more expensive not to act than to act on this problem.
Amy, the argument coming from Republicans, you just heard it a moment ago with Senators Lee and Senator Ernst, saying that it's too costly to do anything about it. There used to be consensus on climate change. Back in the 80s, George H.W. Bush famously said, we're going to combat the greenhouse gas effect with the White House effect. This used to not be an argument between Republicans and Democrats. It was just accepted science. What happened?
Well, right. And in fact, this report was mandated by a law first passed under George H.W. Bush back in the late 1980s. So the reason why this report was issued was because it's the law. And it continues the Trump administration's sort of split screen strategy on climate change. In the president's tweets and comments by the White House, they continue to cast doubt on the scientific consensus of climate change. But when the law is at hand, they follow through. You saw that in this report, and you also saw it in a report issued last year that reaffirmed the scientific consensus on climate change. You also see it in the fact that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has left alone a scientific finding on climate change. So it's the split screen strategy that you're continuing to see. And I think the one big reason why Republicans don't acknowledge climate change and don't want to discuss policies to address it is because they think it will be too costly.
An interesting point made in the New York Times today was this. This report will be used in court in significant ways, says Richard L. Revez, an expert in environmental law at NYU. He says, I can imagine a lawyer for the Trump administration being asked by a federal judge, how can the federal government acknowledge the seriousness of the problem and then set aside the rules that protect the American people from the problem, and they might squirm around coming up with an answer? Legally speaking, is this report going to be problematic for Trump administration's policies, Amy?
I think as of now, it's a little bit too early to say. I think the fact that the administration did not try to change the findings or stifle it or not release it, doing that would have been legally questionable. I think the fact that they let it go through helps them in court. Now, addressing climate change is a really complicated matter. The big environmental regulation that the Obama administration issued was actually blocked temporarily by the Supreme Court, given how controversial it was. So I think it's a really difficult issue to address through regulations. And I think that's why you're seeing, for now, I don't anticipate a lot of legal challenges because they issued the report.
Difficult to address when you don't have bipartisan consensus. And believe it or not, once upon a time, there was bipartisan consensus back in the 1980s. Amy Harder, thank you so much for joining us. Michael Mann, good to see you as well. Sorry about your studio again.